Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Sustainability Speaker Series. Got a full house tonight. I love it. And um, it's also online at the River Falls Public Library YouTube page. And so tonight we are here as part of the Sustainability Speaker Series, to learn from our Forager chef, Alan Bergo. My name is Mike Noreen, and I am representing one of the sponsors of tonight's event. One of the sponsors being Hope for Earth. Some of the other sponsors include the River Falls Public Library, the UW River Falls Office of Sustainability, and we also get support from the River Falls Public Library Foundation. So thank you very much for those participating. Tonight, before we get too far, I want to share with you a couple of other events that are coming up in the Sustainability Speakers Series. One, and some of the information is in the back and also will be online. One is Shaping Our Future, and this is a climate action plan, how to build one and what they are. This is a repeat of another event we had earlier in the year, but we had a great turnout and interest, so we're going to do a repeat of that one. So hopefully you can join us for that. The next one is coming up in, on April 17th, Rebecca Coles. She is doing a presentation called Sex in the Garden. It's about pollinators. Curious, as far as we know. And then, so hopefully you join us. And also want to remind you that EarthFest is coming up on April 26th, a very big event on the university campus with food samples. Alan Bergo will be there as well. We'll have music and lots of vendors and entertainment. So I hope to see you there. So tonight, before I get too far, I want to read Alan's bio. And so with that, Alan is a professional chef with a penchant for botany and mycology. He left a career in the restaurant industry to follow his dream of hunting, studying, and cooking wild plants and mushrooms. He's the author of the Forager Chef's Book of Flora, winner of Hulu's Chefs vs. Wild Outdoor Survival and Cooking Competition. He's been featured on the Today Show, Apple TV, and the Sundance Film Festival. Most know him from his website, foragerchef.com, an educational foraging blog that grew to be a full-time career. His foraging and cooking show, Field Forest Feast, won the James Beard Award in 2022. Please welcome Alan Bergo.
Thanks, Mike. You guys hear me okay? Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to get kind of right into it because it's kind of hard to pack all the information into 45 minutes. This is the trial run of a talk. I'm doing this talk for the Atlanta Botanical Garden in like 3 weeks. And for them, I gave them a synopsis, and it was 20 plants that would change your life. So I'm probably going to have to change that, and it's going to have to be 10. I can't fit it all into 45 minutes. So the title of the talk is The Power of Traditional Foods. And by power, what I really am meaning there is the power of tradition. So when I was writing my book, I had an entire manuscript written when I was still the chef at Lucia's in Uptown in Minneapolis. And as I started writing the book, as I started writing about all these different wild plants that I like to cook, there weren't any really resources for cooking them. And what I started to find was I had to translate a book from Italian to learn some of these recipes for dandelions, or I had to talk to my coworkers from South America to talk about some of the other plants. And what I started to see was that all these like chefy recipes that I had, I scrapped the entire manuscript. And I was just like, this is not good enough. What I need simple things. And I want to get back to the basics. And I started to see that the traditions, I started to find all these cool food traditions, and just blew my mind and completely changed how I was going to write the book. So I started over from scratch, and it ended up taking me 3 years to write the book, but I finally got it done. But the power of tradition is really, it's powerful. It can change your mind. So there's a number of ways you could do that. I mean, one of the things I think about right now is like, food sustainability, food scarcity, having enough food to eat, having free food. I like free food. So it can make people more self-reliant. But really, the power is in the tradition, in the way that it can change your mind. And what we're going to look at here is basically a list of some of my favorite plants. So I'm just going to sit here and geek out for the next 45 minutes, which is what I do best. And I'm just hoping that maybe there's a plant or two. Some of you are probably foragers. Some of you probably know some of these plants, but maybe I can change your opinion or make you think a little bit differently about one or two. And I don't think they might change your life, but they definitely changed my life because this is what I do for a job now. So the first one, purslane, verdolagas. So verdolagas is the Spanish name, and that's very important. So this plant is an extremely common weed. My dad is a conventional corn and soybean farmer. He's been trying to eradicate this plant for like my entire life. And one thing that I noticed, I like this plant. When I cooked it first, I didn't really like it. It was a little bit sour, it was a little bit tart. And I was like, oh, I don't really know how I feel about this. It's a succulent. And then while I was writing the book, I really grew to love it. First, because I was at a farm where there was just tons of it, but I really liked it after I started making Mexican recipes. And one of the things I noticed was my coworkers from South America, when I would have a new hire, they'd kind of come in, maybe they'd be a little nervous or something. And one time I asked them, we were cleaning purslane, and I said, you know this plant? They said, oh, verdolagas. And I said, how does your grandma cook it? And the whole mood changed. And immediately I could see like the walls came down and they felt perfectly at home. And then from then on, whenever I had a new hire from South America, I would bring up the verdolagas, and then I got new recipes. They got all excited to work with the foods. And it was something I noticed. And it was kind of a little trick that I used that I thought was really special. But it's eaten all around the Mediterranean, all around South America. And one of the coolest things about this plant specifically, so a lot of you probably have this in your yard. It grows in my yard, grows in the sidewalk cracks. This has one of the largest yields of any plant that I have harvested. So I used to live at a place called Bubbling Springs Farm, right around Menominee, and there's acres of gardens. And there's a garden with squash and corn, and there's tons of weeds. It's basically a purslane garden. So all the people that lived on the farm, it's kind of a communal family farm. They'd harvest the corn and the squash, and I picked the purslane. And every year I go back, I will serve about 200 pounds of wild greens that I pick myself every year at events. And I have timed myself. It's about 30 pounds in an hour. And my shopping basket, as you can see, is a laundry basket because that is the best thing to it's light, they stack, but they also fit right about 30 pounds. 30 pounds of food in a single hour from a weed, right? And it's a delicious weed. So you can eat it raw or cooked. It's going to be a little crunchy when it's raw. And one of the interesting things is that a lot of plants, like asparagus, if you let asparagus go too far, it's going to become a bush. It's going to look like a fern. There's a period of eating where the plants are just perfect to eat. So with purslane, even after the plant has gone to seed, it's perfectly fine to eat, and it'll be perfectly tender after you give it a little blanch. So you can blanch it in a little salted water to kind of calm the flavor and the tartness, and it can also be mixed with other greens. One of my favorite things to do is to go around my yard right before dinner and pick all of the edible weeds I can, and it's different every day, and I just cook them all together. And people around the world do this every day. And so it's really good mixed with other greens too. One of my favorite things, I served this to over 400 people last year after I made a mistake. I overcooked my plant taco mix. I take a bunch of plants, a little guajillo chili puree, a little garlic, and I overcooked it, and it became basically this spicy, tasty plant paste. I know that sounds so delicious, but it was so good. I started putting it into quesadillas, and cooking things makes things more easily assimilated by the body. It's easier to digest. It's soft and it's a little spicy. I will put some black walnuts in for a little texture, which might sound a little weird, but it's very good. And basically, you just eat it like taco meat. So I do this with any plant, not just purslane. Okay, the next one, lamb's quarters, the canopodiums. So this is related to quinoa. Again, this is a super common weed. We have native varieties, which if you look at them next to the invasive varieties from Europe, they're going to be really hard to tell apart. My favorite one, and you can buy these. The interesting thing is these are weeds. My dad will spray these. And then in Europe, Europe and Mexico, you have specific heirloom varieties that are hundreds of years old. So there's this interesting dichotomy with plants like this, where you have a luxury good in one person's hand, and you have a weed that is meant to be sprayed with Roundup with another person, right? I love that. It's so interesting. So the cloche there, what I call the cloche. Interesting thing about lamb's quarters is it's going to be tender the whole thing. You don't have to. I brought a chef out one time to the farm to pick lamb's quarters, and he was picking every single leaf off of the stems. And I said, dude, we're going to be here for like 10 hours. Like, we need like 20 pounds of this stuff. So you can just take the whole, like, clusters of spinach and just cook them. Another really interesting thing is that a lot of, wild plants, they come out of the ground just like plants in your garden. They might be a little bit dirty. Lamb's quarters loves to be washed. Well, it doesn't really love to be washed, but it's easy to be washed because it repels water naturally. Because if you look, it's kind of hard to see. I can see them. On the leaves are covered with something called tiny minuscule balls of epicuticular wax that helps them shed water. So kind of an interesting characteristic. But they're related to quinoa, so they also make seeds that you could cook just like quinoa. And this is maybe like, just talking about yield again, this is a picture from the farm. There's a cat for scale. May he rest in peace. He was kind of a jerk. That's like a 10 by 15 foot patch of compost. That is all lamb's quarters. And that single patch of compost supplied an entire restaurant for an entire growing season with one harvest every single week. Because what happens when you clip a weed and you don't take out the roots? You're just making more. And it's sitting on the patch of compost. No one planted that. It was just like that every year. There was more food that I got out of that than out of the actual gardens. Well, if we don't count the purslane. Whenever one of the most like things that involve the most skill is to make a salad of purely wild plants. And my hack here, maybe I don't have, like, one of my colleagues, his name's Stephen Barstow, holds the Guinness Book of World Records record for the largest wild salad. It's like over 500 species now. He's a botanist in Norway. I don't have that many plants, but I may have like 10 or 15. But lamb's quarters are so good raw or cooked that I find when I would make this for, large amounts of people, it might be 30, 40, 50% lamb's quarters. So you can just season them with a little oil, balsamic vinegar, something a little sweet is good, and you can just eat a bowl of it raw. It's a fantastic salad green all by itself, raw or cooked. Okay, this one is so good. Black nightshade. So this is a relatively new one for me, just in the past few years. My colleague Sam Thayer introduced me to this, who's a really, really extremely talented forager who lives up by Weyerhaeuser and has written the greatest books on foraging that have ever been written. But black nightshade, I mean, just the name can kind of scare people a little bit. And I felt the same thing when I would see the plant before I knew it. And I don't know exactly where that comes from, because that's a European thing. You have like stories of assassins dipping their blade in black nightshade juice and sticking people. And that may be true, but what it really is a perfect example of is the importance of Latin names. Okay, so this is one of the most misunderstood plants in the entire world. This plant is eaten around the world. And the reason that there's such confusion, I know the infographic here I made is probably a little bit small to see, but I'll go through it. The importance of Latin names is really, really significant here, because we have two plants with the same common name. And one of them is lethally poisonous, and one of them is one of the most widely consumed wild plants around the world. Okay? Like, what a conundrum here. Like, what a mess. So Atropa belladonna is lethally poisonous. I have also never seen it in North America ever, and it's almost exclusively a European plant. So I've never even seen it here. Solanum nigrum, black nightshade, is completely, totally edible and delicious. Also related to tomatoes. So they are nightshades. They're related to tomatoes. Tomato greens are also edible. I read about those in my book, but you're gonna use them like an herb. You're not gonna just like cook them like a leafy green. Nightshade greens are delicious. You cook them, they're like a little bit bitter. They have a little bit of this flavor. It's like, oh, is that like a tomato flavor? I don't exactly know what that is, but they're fantastic. And you can see from the list of places that this is eaten around the world, just how popular they are. So I wrote a blog post on this, and the cool thing is, like, I get to talk to people from around the world every single week. I've been putting out a new blog post every Saturday for 13 years. And I asked people, I'll do a call sometimes and say, hey, like, give me some information. What do you got? And I said, does anyone have any other cultural references or special names that they can add? And I mean, in the Philippines, it's called Amti. Central America, specifically El Salvador, it's Yerba Mora. Then in Mexico, it's Chichiquelite. Germany, Schwarzbieren. Greek, Styphno. South Africa is Nastragal, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Umsobo is an indigenous name. Swahili, it's Managu. And India, Manathakali. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Hmong, but they all eat it, and they're all great. So there's ways that you can look at the plants. If you would see deadly nightshade and black nightshade next to each other, it's a little small. I won't go into that because the plant you will see here, the most common lookalike that will grow directly next to black nightshade, is bittersweet nightshade. So Solanum dulcamera. And if you can tell the difference between purple and white, you can tell the difference between these two plants. And the cool thing is that even if you were to eat a bunch of bittersweet nightshade, maybe a toot, maybe you're not going to die. It is not going to kill you. Maybe you would have a little cramp or something, but this is not lethally poisonous at all. So the bittersweet nightshade has purple flowers, and it has ovoid red fruit that are red when they're ripe. Black nightshade has perfectly circular black fruit and white flowers. And that is the same with all of the Solanum nigrum across North America, because we have a couple different kinds. So if you can tell the difference between purple and white, you're good. One of my favorite things, so in Cameroon, this is how popular it is in Cameroon. They have 3 different cultivars that are named after specific places in Cameroon. And then Kenya too. But they will take it and they'll cook the greens with a little bit of palm oil and some hot chilies, like a whole habanero, a little bit of garlic, some tomatoes and peppers, and they eat it with this kind of hard polenta made from cassava flour called fufu. So you just kind of scoop it up with your fingers, and you will see online, if you look on YouTube, YouTube is also a fantastic reference for different cultural traditions and cultural foods from around the world. It's really democratized the sharing of cultural food traditions, but you just see people scooping it up with their hands, which I always find kind of funny. And if you are gardeners, you may have heard about garden huckleberry. So this is to further complicate things. Garden huckleberry is absolutely not a huckleberry. Not even close. The huckleberry is a vaccinium. So this is Solanum melanocerasum. This is black nightshade, but is one of the African varieties of black nightshade. So it makes larger greens and fruit that tastes terrible. So they call it garden huckleberry. No one that I know grows this plant for the fruit. The fruit tastes terrible unless you assassinate it with sugar, which we'll get to too, because it's actually made into a commercial product in South Africa called Nastragal preserves. So if you need more irrefutable evidence that black nightshade is completely edible and good tasting with enough sugar on the berries, it's actually sold as a commercial product. But they call it garden huckleberry because it's a PR campaign, and people see that word black nightshade and they say, oh, it's poisonous. So there is the demystifying garden huckleberry. Okay, salsify. This picture, I bought these. I take all the pictures too for my books and everything. These I bought in the green market in New York and brought them back in my suitcase because I do that everywhere that I go. And this is Tragopodon. These are a very common weed. Again, also a luxury vegetable. Another thing that my dad is going to spray. So if you've ever seen what looks like a giant dandelion, it is not a dandelion. It is a root vegetable. So this is a biennial, and you can plant this. This is the stage when you see the giant dandelion stage. This is the stage when you're going to gather the seeds, and I plant these in my yard. And because it's a biennial, like a carrot, it's just like a carrot. You're going to get a root vegetable that first year, but you want to have it in nice soft soil so the root doesn't split when it hits rocks. But that's the picture right there. Like whenever people see these, it's hard to identify because the green just kind of blends in. But once it starts to make that kind of giant dandelion seed head, I mean, they're like 3 to 4 times the size of a dandelion. But that is when you're going to gather the seeds, bring them home, I don't even put them in the dehydrator. I just put them in a little bag and put them in my seed collection, and you have all the free salsify seeds. So this is a weed, right? This is a non-native plant. This is a European plant. This is kind of hard to see, but this is basically a hodgepodge of every single French cookbook I have has recipes for salsify. And they're all like extremely fancied recipes for salsify. So I would buy salsify, this weedy plant. I would pay $100 to get a 5-pound box, and it has to come shipped from Belgium. It is one of the most delicious root vegetables that you will ever eat, along with another one called skirret. These were very popular in the Victorian era when people were growing all kinds of interesting plants. So imagine if you had a carrot, that carrot was not sweet, and it was white, and it tasted like an artichoke. That is what salsify tastes like. It's unbelievably good, which is why it is in every single French cookbook that I have, and many other ones. One of the things they'll do, you have to cook it in what's called like a white court bouillon stock, a little bit of flour, because it's going to oxidize and turn brown. And you cook it, you have to cook them, simmer them for like 45 minutes to an hour, like a super long time until they get really tender. And then in Lyon in France, they might fry them up with onions, or you can simmer them with a little chicken stock and cream and white wine and creamed salsify. I could just eat bowls of it. Probably the most common way is to just take the roots after they're cooked and fry them in clarified butter or duck fat until they're golden brown, a couple herbs, and yeah, I mean, it wants for nothing. Okay, bee balm. This is probably one that a lot of people know because it's everywhere. I love this plant. So easy. Such a nice little wild plant to have, and the bees love it. So Monarda fistulosa and Monarda didyma. So there's basically two varieties, but we have two extremely different flavors. They're slightly similar. What you're going to taste here is thyme. So it is strong in like the essential oil thymol. So you're going to taste a combination of thyme and oregano. And the purple flowered wild version, the flowers and the leaves are great to eat, and they're very savory. So what's so fascinating is just how starkly different the flavors are between these two plants. So the didyma on the right, that's the cultivated one that most people are going to know because it's people have it all over the place. I love that one too. I do not use the leaves, but you could use it on savory things, but it tastes like fruit. It tastes like thyme and oregano crossed with ripe raspberries or strawberries. So I use it on desserts. And when I was supplying the Bachelor Farmer in Minneapolis, out of the 70 or 80 different species of things that I brought in, the red Monarda flowers were his hands down the chef's favorite ingredient of everything that I brought. Just a simple little tiny flower that packs a huge punch. So I love to just take the plants, I'll let them grow and get flowers before I harvest them, tie them up, dry them, crumble them, put them in a jar, and I use them anywhere that I would use thyme or oregano. And the name I usually use for it is pizza plant, because if you put this in tomato sauce, it immediately tastes like pizza sauce. It loves tomatoes, just like thyme or oregano. So anywhere you could use thyme or oregano. Another thing I make is I just take the fresh leaves, I puree them. This is a Sicilian recipe where they would puree oregano with seawater and citrus zest. It's called salmorejo. And you just take a little bit of olive oil and the greens and a little parsley and some lemon zest, lemon juice. Fantastic on grilled fish, grilled meat, all kinds of things. Okay. The leaves or the flowers? Yeah, both. Anyone heard of Timsala? Okay, a couple people know Timsala. So this is a native plant that a lot of people have not heard of. This is one of the staple crops of the Plains Indians, and it's probably the coolest wild plant that I've ever eaten. It is a tuber, it's a legume, and you can buy seeds for this plant from Prairie Moon Nursery. And what it is just the most beautiful little leguminous plant. If you can see on the left there, it's kind of stout. It's like this. It's a miniature tumbleweed. And what happens is in South Dakota, I will go out to with my friends out by the reservation, and we look for tumbleweeds. And underneath that tumbleweed is going to be a little tuber with a hard skin and a taproot that is paper thin and can be like 5 feet long. It is one of the most curious and fascinating plants. And the interesting thing is that you can see there's a braid there. You get all these taproots. It was born to braid. I mean, I will braid anything. I love I love braiding. They braid garlic or another plant I didn't leave in here called avaluk. But you take the tap roots and you braid them, you stick them on a wall, and they dry themselves out naturally, and they will be good to kingdom come. And this is something that money cannot buy, and a native plant that you can plant in your front yard, and or anywhere you want that's going to have some nice sun, and you can get your own timsala and have this beautiful little flower. But after they're dried, they'll be good forever. You just take them and put them into a crock pot and cook them. The tubers swell to triple their size, and they soak up the broth of whatever they're cooking. So you always have them in soup. And this is a bison soup. The traditional way that I was instructed to cook them is with bison tripe, but I have not tried that yet. The inner lining of their stomach. I forget what it's called, but they swell like 3 times their size, soaking up all of the juice. And the flavor it's hard to describe. It's like a little bit of potato, a little bit of radish, a little bit of turnip. Prairie turnip is the other name. Just an absolutely fascinating plant with so much tradition that I really think that more people should know about. Okay, a lot of people are going to know nettles, right? Hopefully, I can give you a few things that you don't know. So we have urtica, and we have Lapertea. We have 2 different types of nettles here. So especially around here, you guys are going to have a lot of wood nettles. So let's see. Wood nettles. There's a wood nettle. Wood nettle is our indigenous species. We also have indigenous nettles, but we also have nettles that are from overseas, from Europe. And again, most people think of these as a weed. Extremely different flavors between these 2 plants. The wood nettle, if I steam it, and I steam my nettles, and we'll go over how you can break the trichomes and make them edible. But wood nettles, they have a more pronounced stinger. They will sting you through your clothes. They come up a little bit after your regular stinging nettles, and the flavor is completely different. So the flavor of wood nettles is so strong, it tastes like eating a mouthful of apple blossoms, where stinging nettles have like a saline, I don't like to use the word fishy, but almost like a fishy quality to them that is also very, very good. But the cool thing about wood nettles, which these are going to be in the woods, and stinging nettles are going to like more kind of disturbed area. They will also have a shoot, like a little vegetable. So nettles do not really have like a physical stinger. Well, it is physical. It's a trichome. So this is magnified like 100 times with my most expensive lens. So you can see there is a little thing on the bottom with formic acid, like a bee sting. So what happens is you break that crystal and it sticks in you. And that's where you get that, you get the itch that comes from that. So there's a number of different ways that you can make nettles edible. You can dry them. You can dehydrate them. It makes unbelievably good tea. You can also just buy dried nettles. I buy them by the pound if I'm going to make, 300-400 cups at a time. I'll show you a picture of the tea too. It's unbelievably good. You can crush them. So last year I was on Care 11 and I made the TV anchors eat raw nettles. So I just take them. It's an old Forager's parlor trick. You smash them in your hand and you are physically breaking those trichomes, and then you can just eat it raw. It might be a little tingly, but it's not going to be just like giraffing it and eating it right off of the plant. You can cook them. You can put them right in a pan, or you can boil them. But if you boil them, you're going to lose some of those water-soluble nutrients and flavors and things like that. These different compounds are going to come out into the water. You're going to lose a little bit of flavor there. So steaming. Steamed nettles, steamed for under 5 minutes until they're tender and taste good to you. A little bit of soft butter at the table and salt. I could eat that every day. One of the best things that I like about spring. So with the traditions, again, nettles are a weed. They are also sold commercially for $10 to $15 a pound, which is more than any heirloom lettuce that I ever purchased. Right? We have weed, we have a trash plant for one person, and we have a luxury good for another person. And nettle soup, you can just put them into liquid and it's going to denature the stinger. It's one of the most common things around the world. For a long time, I only knew Scandinavian nettle soup. When I cooked for the Swedish ambassador about 10 years ago, he specifically requested, I want nettle soup, because he was coming in the spring. And that is the one on the bottom. So when you puree them, it gets that fishy quality that comes out. And if you've never had it before, it's very special. Italians have a version too. And then in Spain, they have another version that uses Serrano ham. My favorite story about nettle soup is the most expensive dinner that I ever cooked. I charged $1,000 a person. And I had foie gras, truffles, caviar, all the expensive things. I pulled out all the stops. I also made nettle soup. Guess what? Hands down, the favorite thing of every person. There's a life lesson in there somewhere for me. Nettle soup. It was everyone's favorite from the entire menu, and it still sticks with me. You had a question? Oh, there's a recipe on my website and a video that describes the process. Yeah. Someone from Istanbul sent me a message and they said, "Have you tried our salad yet?" And I said, "Your what?" "Our nettle salad." So in Istanbul, they take nettles, they crush them with a rolling pin, they chop them up, mix them with tomatoes and feta cheese and olives and olive oil, and they call it a salad. And it's actually pretty good. But, so you can actually just eat raw nettles. Nettle tea. I dry the nettles and make the tea. Like I said, you can buy this. I served hundreds of portions of this last year. It's not just tea. Like, tea is like a disservice to how just good this is. The key is mint. This is a little wild mint from my yard, and you boil the nettles with the mint and a little bit of maple syrup. One of the best teas you've ever had, hot or cold. And dried nettles are actually relatively cheap. Nettles are also a fiber crop. They're a seed crop and an oil crop. And in Nepal, I work with a lamb and goat farm from Downing, Wisconsin, and they do mission work to teach sustainable ruminant herding to underprivileged women in Mali and Nepal and Burkina Faso. So she knows I love wild foods, and they have a nettle industry in Nepal. I'm talking to someone about making nettle belts that I can sell. But the nettle fiber, it's related to hemp. It's in the Cannabinaceae family, but nettle fiber before wool, Middle Ages and back farther, nettle fiber was the fiber of choice, like all across Western Europe. Amaranthus. So these are chenopod's too. These are related to lamb's quarters. And what's really cool about these is just how much beefy, leafy green that you get from each plant. So we have a couple different types. This one is going to be something like Amaranthus retroflexus. But then we also have cultivated varieties like this burgundy amaranth, which is so beautiful. And the little tiny sprigs are one of my favorite things to put in a salad. Just that little pop of purple is so nice. So this is a plant that we're going to cook. It's not something that I'm going to really put into a salad raw, unless it's just those minuscule tiny sprigs. But you just get so much bang for your buck with these. It's a really hardy plant. You get a super high yield. And I don't know how to describe it besides, like, it's beefy. So the stems, you can peel the shoots and you'll get a shoot vegetable too. And just like most of the other plants, you're going to get multiple harvests a year. Now, going on to tradition here, I didn't know very many traditional things made with amaranth until I started looking at Caribbean food. And when I was giving a talk for the Mother Earth News Fair in Texas a few years ago, I didn't get to eat any barbecue, but I found a Jamaican restaurant with a Jamaican chef. And I saw that he had callaloo, and I went there just to eat the callaloo so I could ask him to come out and talk to me about it. And that's how I got my callaloo recipe. It's basically braised greens with peppers, and it's a little spicy, and there might be some allspice. And to touch on the tradition part, I was just auditioning for a new gig where I'm going to be cooking and doing foraging tools at a resort in the British Virgin Islands. And the woman that I was talking to, she and her husband are insanely wealthy. And they said, "Come out and do an audition and cook for us and make whatever you want." I knew she was from the Caribbean. So I did a little hodgepodge of things, a mix of some different stuff, but most like super fancy. It's all I bring all my china out, just like the nettle soup menu. Guess what got me the gig? A bowl of callaloo. And she called me and she said, "No one that we interviewed made callaloo. No one made something like that. I tasted that, and I was at the table with my grandmother when I was a child." Right? So special. Pokeweed. So this is one that you may not have seen because we are kind of at the north end of pokeweed's range. And this is a really interesting, truly American plant. It's Phytolacca americana is the name. So, America is in the epithet of this plant. So what's interesting about it is that this is highly poisonous plant. And my cat tasted like, oh, she loves plants. She jumped up, she ate a little bit. She was puking for days. I felt so bad. I poisoned my cat. But it is a highly poisonous plant that has also been sold in grocery stores across the American South for many, many years. Sold in cans, multiple different brands. Poke salad. And if you may have heard a song, Elvis did a cover of it, Poke Salad Annie. Down in Louisiana, where the alligators grow so mean. It's a song about a girl that's going out to gather wild greens. Poke salad. So one thing that no one talks about with poke, and I'll get to how you cook it, is the shoots versus the greens. And this is something I learned from Sam Thayer because he brought over a tuber and the thing grew 8 feet tall in a single year. I'm about to personally introduce Midway St. Paul to pokeweed. But when you have a really old plant, it will grow these very thick shoots. So with a flick of a knife, that is about a 4 to 5 pound shoot of pokeweed. So most people, and if I talk to people in the South, people are extremely opinionated about how I cook pokeweed, or just that I cook it in general because I'm a Yankee. They just cook the greens. And the greens in the outer part of the plant is where the toxins are located. But when you get these elder plants, the yield and the amount of food that you get from it is just it's crazy that I can just cut something with a knife and this huge thing that is all food. So what you do is you peel it, and the toxins are concentrated in the outer part of the plant and in the leaves. So the leaves have to be cooked longer. And what we found is that you do not cook this by yourself. You need to. I have a recipe on my site you can look at. Just don't go out willy-nilly cooking pokeweed. It's also pretty hard to find here, but it is in the Twin Cities where it's warmer in there, in the kind of like in the inner city in a few places. But you peel it, and then you're going to cut these shoots into nice big pieces. And cutting them into pieces, whenever I want to like detoxify things. So whenever you're detoxifying things, just like normal people do, first we detoxify our food. I'm going to cut it into pieces because you're going to get a better dispersal of the solutes into the water because they're water soluble. Basically, we're boiling it. And I generally do not like when people talk about wild food and they're like, boil it 3 times. There's a lot of things that's really unnecessary for. With poke, it is definitely necessary. So I actually did, to get my recipe, I poisoned myself intentionally so I could find the threshold of where that is. I get a little crazy sometimes. But it's worth it. Now I know. It's like that's knowledge. Money can't buy that knowledge. So you boil it 3 times. And the classic thing to have with it, you take some bacon, homemade bacon here, you cook it till the fat comes out, and then you add the poke and you cook that until the water comes out, and then you push it to the side, you crack a couple eggs in there, and then you've taken hot peppers and stuffed them in a jar with vinegar, and you kind of dash a little bit on top. And it is one of the best breakfasts that I have ever had. And you can make it with poke greens too, but it's not quite as good. It's hard to describe the texture, just how good and like barely holding together and succulent and juicy the stems are. And they have this little bit of a grassy flavor. They're so good, and they're mild. They're not bitter at all. It's just a wonderful plant. Cow parsnip. Oh, yes. Now we see parsnip. Now everyone gets scared. Okay, well, we are going to have fun because I saved the best for last. This is a great myth-busting plant. So cow parsnip is a native plant. And a lot of people will look at cow parsnip and they will conflate it with wild parsnip. And, the DNR has been known to spray cow parsnip, thinking that it is an invasive plant. So, I mean, why do they do that? Well, because the plant has juices only in the above ground leafy green portions of the plant that if they get on your skin in the sunlight, you can get a burn or you can get a rash, and it can be pretty bad. But that rash also varies with individual sensitivity. There's a number of things that come into play. But this is also a traditional food. Specifically, it's eaten by indigenous people in Alaska, where it gets the name pushki. And I plant this plant in my yard. It's in the carrot family. It's these beautiful, beautiful flowers. It grows nice and tall, has nice big leaves. The entire plant is edible. It's going to get a stronger flavor as it grows. But this is a native plant. And I'll get to some of the really cool aspect of it. But we got to talk about poison parsnip too. So these are wild parsnip roots. Does anyone know anyone that has been burned by wild parsnip? Yeah. So parsnip, this is Pastinaca sativa. This is brought here from Europe. Is brought here from Europe as a food. And does anyone grow parsnips in your garden? Anyone ever grown parsnip? Okay. So they're both Pastinaca sativa, and the parsnip in your garden will burn you too. And what I like to tell people is that it is not the plant's fault. that you put the sap on your arm in the sunlight, or more typically you weed whacked the plant when you were wearing shorts, and now you have blisters all over you, and it's really bad, and it can be really ugly. But garden parsnip will do the exact same thing because the plants are botanically the same, and they will cross pollinate. It's not the parsnip's fault. There's also giant hogweed, which is much bigger, that I have not seen here, but you can eat the leaves too. You just don't crush them and put the juice all over your skin. And another fascinating thing is I said this is a carrot plant. Carrot leaves, celery juice, depending on the person's individual sensitivity, will also give people a burn. Right? Yeah. I love that. I love that. So in Italy, in southern Italy specifically, we have something called Zaverne. And this you can do with Angelica. Oh, I love Angelica too. I was going to try to grow that. So Angelica and cow parsnip are extremely similar. I grow our native purple Angelica in my yard, Angelica atropurpurea. And there is a stage where the book that I have says the people on the Salentine Peninsula feverishly go to hunt out the Zaverne during the short season. And what it is the blossoms, the flower blossoms, before they open, they are, I think in my show, I call them cocoon broccoli. And it's like the coolest vegetable that you've ever eaten. It's like broccoli inside a cocoon with some little leaves on the top. And I don't always deep fry stuff at home, but the first time I served these, it was at a restaurant to the general public, and someone pulled me aside and he's like, "You just fed me a Harry Potter vegetable." I said, "I know. Isn't it awesome?" The flavor is mild. I mean, a little bit of perfume. Angelica, on the other hand, is so aromatic. It's used in gin. So when you cook Angelica blossoms like this, I serve them for dessert. And I put them in a sweet batter, and then I shower them with powdered sugar, and I put lemon zest and a little bit of like a shot of brandy or vanilla in the batter, and you eat the vegetable as a dessert because the aroma is it's so floral. So two very, very similar plants, two very different ways that you could serve them and enjoy them, or just let the bees enjoy them because they're gorgeous. Now, this is back to cow parsnip. So one thing that most people don't know is that you can buy cow parsnip seeds from Amazon. And that's exactly where this came from. So in Persia, they have a related plant. Ours is probably, Heracleum maximum, Heracleum lanatum. I forget the exact one. But then we have Heracleum spondylium. That's the one that's from the Middle East. And it is one of the cornerstone spices of Persian cuisine. So again, a plant that, maybe the DNR sprays it here in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and then in Persia, they're using the same thing to make a bowl of lentils or something like that. It's one of the best seasonings for legumes, a pot of beans, some peas, but it has a really particular affinity for legumes specifically, but especially lentils. So when I served this to 200 people at the Wild Harvest Festival a few years ago. I might make it again. Black lentils, a little bit of preserved lemon, olive oil, and a little bit of the gold par. And it's a fantastic, fantastic seasoning from a weed. And that's it. I do have a few books. I don't know how big the crowd would be, and some limited edition. I'm coming with a line of mushroom knives made in Finland, so I brought a few of those if you want to take a look. But there's where to find me is my website, Instagram, YouTube. If you get down on that, I'm also probably signing the contract. I just got the contract yesterday for my next book, so that's all going to be on Meat, and that'll be out in 2026. Yeah, thanks for coming, and we can take questions if anybody has some questions. Oh, yes. Oh, excellent. Excellent. That's great to hear. Well, it's gonna grow back. I mean, it's a hardy plant. I had like this one. It had like a 7-foot wingspan in my front yard in my boulevard, and a vole burrowed into the root, and the thing wilted in a day. But it's gonna come back. It's gonna come back this year. It's a hardy plant. Anybody else? Right there. Okay, excellent question. The question is Palmer amaranth a noxious weed, and is it similar to the amaranth that I'm talking about? Palmer amaranth is a great story. Okay, so I get to talk about my dad. So my dad, conventional corn and soybean farmer. This is again like the genius of like we cannot outsmart nature. Palmer amaranth is $1 billion question. It is $1 billion plant, a kind of a conundrum for farmers to figure out because so far, what happens? Well, to answer your question quickly, um, it is a noxious weed. It's also edible and very good. It is this. It is the same. Like it's like interchangeable with the Amaranthus retroflexus that I was talking about. Like if it's an amaranth, they're all edible. That's a cool thing about foraging is if you learn one plant, a lot of times you didn't learn one plant, you learned 100. Like if you see mustard greens have a flower that looks like a cross. So they called it crucifer. And if you know the crucifer flower, you didn't learn one mustard green, you learned 150, right? But the Palmer amaranth, so far, like Pioneer, Roundup, all of these chemical companies, the Palmer amaranth has overcome every single chemical that they have used on it. They come up with a new one just specifically to kill Palmer amaranth. It'll work for a year, and then it absorbs it, and then they have to find a new one. And we're going to get to a point of like critical mass where people are going to have to start farming Palmer amaranth. Yes. Can you eat garlic mustard? Yes, it tastes like crap. To be completely honest. So garlic mustard, okay, it's a brassica. It is really, really widespread. Some parts of it are better than others. I shouldn't say it tastes like crap. It does taste like crap. The shoots are meristematic, so it's young growing plant tissue. They are much less bitter. So I don't tell people to start out with garlic mustard. It is a good beginner plant, but it also can give people a bad taste for foraging in general because it just embodies some of these stereotypes about wild food. It's bitter. You grab a whole grocery bag of it and it doesn't have a lot of mass. And that whole grocery bag is going to cook down to like this little bitty tiny greens and they're going to be super bitter. But when the shoots come out, I will harvest the shoots and absolutely eat those because it's something about the young growing tissue. It hasn't developed as bitter alkaloids or something, but they're much better than the greens. So look for the shoots. And a lot of people will say like, hey, I harvested some garlic mustard. I'm doing something good for, nature. If you're not ripping up the plants root and all before they flower, you are doing nothing to stop it. And it's a biennial. So if you look down, it's so depressing because we'll go in the woods around here and it's like a sea of first year seedlings. Like you go out and start picking the big plants and you're like, wait, what are those? Oh no, there's like thousands of them. So yes, you can eat garlic mustard, absolutely. In a mix of greens, preferably. Anybody else? Absolutely. I mean, that is more of a mushroom thing, but whenever you're eating a new food, kind of the general rule is eat an ounce or two and then digest it. And if you're fine, you're good. But generally speaking, greens are very, very safe. Mushrooms are a completely different thing because you can have anyone can have an allergy to any of the 50, 60 different species around here in the Midwest that I would pick. And then we have, maybe 18 different individual species of morel. And you could have an allergy to one specific species, or maybe you have an allergy to one specific species, but only when you drink alcohol. Like, oh yeah, it is like it's a wormhole. Yeah. Yes, yes. I contemplated putting that in here. Japanese knotweed. There's the best thing that I do with it. If you like to make pickles, you preferably get really thick shoots, but some people will not peel them. But if you get really thick ones, you can peel them. So like older plants are better. But the conundrum is we don't want older plants. We don't want larger colonies because if you know you have some on your property, like you can get fined, like serious fines in Britain because it'll hurt the concrete and all kinds of things. You can peel the thick shoots and you can ferment them like fermented pickles, and that keeps them tender because if you cook it, it's like rhubarb. It's like green rhubarb, and it just turns to complete mush. So cooking it with rhubarb, like 50-50, is good. It's a little bit strong on its own. I also just cook them and puree them with a little maple syrup, and I will make like jam, like a spread to put on things, and that can be good. But the best thing in my mind is savory, and it's peeling the shoots and putting them in a jar with salt and just screwing the lid on. 2 weeks later, you have fermented Japanese knotweed pickles that are not slimy and mucilaginous, but they're crisp and they keep their crispness. That is what you want to use. So the tricky thing is, like, a lot of times when people see it, they're already this tall, and that's past already. They have to be thick, and ideally, really, really thick and not starting to get hollow as they will when they get a little bit older. Okay, so we harvest roots when the plant is dormant. So that's spring and fall. Either or, you can pick.
So we didn't talk about milkweed. Do you have a favorite way of preparing them?
Okay, the question is, do I like to eat milkweed? What's my favorite way to prepare milkweed? Absolutely. I have a number of different recipes in my book. Milkweed, so we're talking about common milkweed specifically, is like really the only one that I recommend eating. There's showy milkweed too that you can eat, and also let's see, poke milkweed. But milkweed, we don't have a lot of it, so it's not good to eat it. Any other milkweed would probably make you really sick. But milkweed, common milkweed, is very traditional food. The pods, when they're exactly 2 inches long, are probably my favorite. And they're one of the coolest little vegetables. They're like eating a little drumstick or something. I blanch them first. That is something that people can have a sensitivity to. People can definitely have a sensitivity to milkweed. Overconsumption with milkweed will also cause some people to have gastrointestinal issues. But again, this varies by person to person. So that's why we eat 1 or 2 ounces of something, wait and see if you digest it okay, and then you go ahead and you can eat a little bit more. But still, with milkweed, not a lot more. But blanching the pods and then putting them in a little buttermilk and then a little flour and frying them in a pan, milkweed poppers. I put a little Cajun seasoning in the flour. Oh, they're so good. A little dip or something, fantastic. The flowers I actually do serve and eat raw. If you put them into something, it's so crazy because milkweed is a very vegetal tasting plant. It's kind of like a green bean flavor. And the flowers, if you put them into a drink or like an alcohol and macerate them, or like lemonade, it turns it hot pink and makes it taste like watermelon Jolly Ranchers. That's an interesting thing to do too. So milkweed vinegar, taking the flowers and fermenting them into a vinegar, you get a hot pink vinegar with a fruity aroma, and it's fantastic.
Like you were saying, a lot of these people who start weeds and they get sprayed a lot. Do you have any tips or any way to tell if they've been sprayed, or would you just try to avoid anything that you don't know that? Like,
okay, the question is, how do we know if a lot of these are weeds and the weeds can get sprayed? How do we know we're harvesting from a clean area? You harvest from places that you know. So I will be honest, in Wisconsin, public land there's not as much accessible public land as there is in Minnesota, and it's part of the reason I moved back. Find a farm and volunteer, have a garden, or just you're harvesting from places that you know for sure that are not sprayed. And this, it kind of comes down to individual, your individual preference. If plants have been sprayed, they're probably spraying a lot of plants at once. And if anything ever looks brown and sunburnt and strangely wilted, I'm not touching it with a 10-foot pole, and I'm going to go to a different area. These are also going to be things that are like on the peripheries. That's not going to happen deep in the woods. So with wood nettles or something like that, no one's going to spray wood nettles. But yeah, look for plants that if you see plants, especially like Japanese knotweed, if you see a bunch of Japanese knotweed and it's strangely wilted, that gets sprayed all the time. So you either want to get it before it gets sprayed, or I just probably wouldn't harvest there because those chemicals are probably going to be in the soil too. So we harvest from clean areas. In the back. Oh, it's so good. Oh, you're welcome. That is a really underutilized it's like arugula dipped in sugar. It is so good. Like strangely sweet. So good. Such a good plant. Dame's rocket, Hesperus matronalis. I think matron should be the root. Yeah, it's an invasive mustard green. It's all over. It's going to have white or purple flowers, but it is like so common around here. But it is the first green, one of the first greens that will come in the spring. If you look for garlic mustard at the same time, you can look for Dame's rocket and taste those side by side. Yeah.
How do you cook that or eat that?
Okay, the question is, how do we eat Dame's rocket? Well, I'm going to typically just get a pot of water that is seasoned with salt until it tastes like the sea. And then I take the greens, I put them into the water. When the greens are wilted, I take them out, and then I'm going to refresh them in cold water. I'm going to form it into a ball, and then I'm going to put that in the fridge. So if you would blanch the greens in unsalted water, you maybe have a day or two before they go bad. If you use salted water, you have a week or more. And then you can take those greens, and I just put balls of greens like that. I vacuum seal them, I put them in the freezer. And that's how I have bus tubs that fit 30 pounds of greens stacked in a 50 cubic foot freezer. That's how I serve my wild greens that I serve to the general public every year. So then after it's in the little ball, you could fry it up. You could put it in a soup. You can do whatever you want, just like if it was cooked spinach. So we par cook the greens because it's going to make them tender. So you just boil them, take them out, and when I say boil, like 30 seconds, a minute, and I describe that in the one of the first things I talk about in my book too. If you go to Europe, especially Italy, like I was in Tuscany last year cooking, and at the markets, there was fresh greens, and then they just sell balls of pre-cooked blanched greens, and you go and you buy your spinach ball, and you just bring that home. It doesn't take up as much space. It's portable. But yeah, I'm usually blanching most of the plants or steaming, like in the case of nettles. Oh, I'll put them in a plastic bag, or ideally I will vacuum seal them because there's not going to be air, because then we will get freezer burn. But the salt is very important because that preservative aspect, like, do not underestimate how powerful that is in lengthening the shelf life. So with my greens that are salted and frozen, if I take them out, I forgot about them for a day or maybe 3 or 4 days. They're fine, totally fine. Oh no more restaurants for me ever. I'm going to do a few dinners at a place called Hyacinth in St. Paul. It's a friend of mine is there. I will do one dinner probably in the spring. It's just, I am very busy now, and especially with the book, I have to turn the book in November, and it's going to be like every single day. I sent 3,000 images into for my last book. So like doing all the stuff and the recipe testing and the photography is just crazy. It's going to be nuts. So I don't do many culinary events anymore. There's not a lot of restaurants that serve wild food. It's hard. It's expensive. These are luxury goods, and restaurants now, they don't have the budget. And there is like the educating of the general public to be able to appreciate things, and then balance that with the increased price. People will just go have a burger and fries, and that's okay. Absolutely not. The question is berry flesh worth eating? So a little context here for anyone who doesn't know about yew, that's Taxus baccata. This is a highly poisonous ornamental plant, but the flesh around the fruit is edible. This is a novelty. I'm just going to go pick blackcap raspberries. Well, yeah, so I think, how can I phrase that for the people at home? Do I talk about medicinal aspects of plants, or am I knowledgeable about them at all? The answer is I'm not knowledgeable about medicinal plants. I talk about what I know, and talking about medicinal aspects of stuff is a wormhole, and that is a great way to step in poop. I talk about what I'm an expert at, and I'm not an expert in medicinal properties of anything. So I leave that to herbalists. Yes, yes, but I know that every time I go outside and I eat something, it is as fresh as it can be, fresher than anything from the store, and I know that it's not bad. Sean is so busy, he never answers my texts anymore. It's good, but most of the food needs a little salt. Don't tell him. Do I use cattails? Okay, so the coolest part of cattails, yes, the pollen is great, but swamps also suck in the summer. So I harvest pine pollen instead, which is crazy cool. But the critical period for harvesting, you have a day, maybe 2 days. If you have a red pine tree in your yard, you ever seen all the pollen falling down? So I will go out in a good patch. I have to wear a mask because I'm going to get like pollen lung or something like that. But you can harvest gallons of pollen. I make up and you add it to baked goods. It gives it like this fudgy quality. So you can do this with cattail pollen too. And they actually there's a whole tradition of cattail. One of the coolest traditions of cattail cookery is in Iraq, of all the places. And they make something called kiryat. And they take all this pollen, they mix it. I'm still trying to figure out the proportions. They mix the pollen with sugar. They wrap it in muslin in a giant cone, and they steam it. And you go to markets, and they have this cone of pollen candy, and they chip it off like a rock, and then you eat this pollen candy. And then in China, there is one of the coolest things to do is they have, I cannot pronounce it at all. They are little candies, and that they take in the spring. You take pollen, you mix a little bit of honey just until it comes together. I put a little knob of butter and some sea salt too. And then with 3 fingers specifically, you make a little cone, and you serve these tiny cones of honey pollen. They're like truffles, and you have them with chopsticks and tea, and they're so good. What's the other thing? The lateral rhizomes of cattails are they're one of the coolest things that I've eaten, but one of the more difficult. I hate leeches. And they can just be a filthy mess to go get those. I would have to wear like a full bodysuit. Sam Thayer will go out there in his boxers and then come on. But those are like it's kind of artichokey. They're very, very tender, almost like a water chestnut, but they don't have a granular texture to them. They're incredible. The cattail shoots are also very good. You have a very low yield on those, but cattail shoots are very good. That you just have a low yield, and you have to cleaning them is kind of a learning curve because you have all these different layers. You're gonna have like 75% waste, and that really thin inner part is kind of like a heart of palm or something like that, and they're very good raw. Anybody else?
But mainly about the wood nettle, or the other nettles and stuff that grows in my patio garden and everything else. Can you simply the same way, or if they're not as good?
Thank you for mentioning that because I kind of glanced over that. I was worried about the time. So the question is, we talked about wood nettle, 2 different types of nettles. Are wood nettles and common stinging nettles interchangeable in the kitchen? The answer is absolutely, emphatically yes. So the stinging nettles are the ones that I made the soup out of that everyone loved, and they're the ones that I eat the most out of. They also sting less than wood nettle because wood nettle, like I said, the stingers are so strong. The wood nettle goes through your clothes, and stinging nettles, they might if you're wearing something thin, but the wood nettles are the worst stingers. They're both good, but I get more of a harvest from regular stinging nettles. I think everyone should grow stinging nettles in their yard. I got a big rhizome last year, and unfortunately I planted it next to my garden hose, so that's a learning curve. But one of the cool things is like nettles are so high in nitrogen that you can take the plants, and if you boil some, you just boil them and let them sit and basically like let it rot until it smells like a crypt. And it is so high in nitrogen, it's probably my favorite fertilizer to use. Is a very old tradition, is nettle water fertilizer, but it needs to go through this fermentation process to kind of break down some of the, I want to say like sugars or something like that. So yeah, absolutely interchangeable in the kitchen and one of my favorite plants to eat. Oh, I love it. Yeah, no, they're a great plant and they're easy to grow. Like even I can grow them. Like I am not a gardener at all.
Lots of that one of the blueberry bushes. And I thought it was poisonous, but you're saying it's not.
That plant is mildly poisonous. The one that is not. So if you have purple flowers, red fruit that are ovoid, and it's viney, that is Solanum dulcamara. That's bittersweet nightshade. If the plant is not viney, it's more herbaceous and soft, kind of looks like a tomato, and that it has black, perfectly spherical fruits with white flowers, those are edible. So I just encourage the ones to grow that I like, and just they will spread though, and they get kind of unwieldy. But I'll let them grow, and I'll just clip the greens, and I just cook the greens as they come. But yeah, the bittersweet nightshade you can get rid of, and the black nightshade you can keep. And like once you really like know one season of looking intently at the plants, like you will know it will be like picking a banana off the shelf. Like we really undervalue our instincts. Like we're foragers for millions of years, and it's kind of like having a bike in your garage that your ancestors passed down. Once you get on it, like you really the learning increases rapidly. But yeah, at first, like you look at them side by side and they can look eerily similar. Like they can be tricky to tell apart.
So what do you think berries?
So the berries, they're so. This is a good distinction to make between the garden huckleberry, the larger African versions. Their berries are like 5 times the size. So the garden huckleberry you can actually grow for the fruit. The catch is that the fruit does not taste anything as good as the tiny berries. So the black nightshade berries, they're the size of your pinky nail, and you can absolutely eat them raw. You wouldn't want to eat like handfuls of unripe berries, but the black ones, when they're ripe, they're perfectly sweet. They taste like a ground cherry. They're like a mini black ground cherry. They're very good. You can make jam. I. It's also a pain to harvest them because they have a calyx, so that calyx sticks. You have to pick the calyx off of every single. You could get like 200 berries off of like one single little plant. Um, but you can like shake them onto a tarp if you have children, child labor. In the back.
You're called as an expert.
I mean, that's hard to pinpoint. So I probably started like I was working in restaurants and I was spoon fed, right? So my learning was like really, and it was really sped up by working on the job. So I before I even went outside, because I started with mushrooms, plants were second, and I had already, before I went outside, I had already tasted, touched, held, cooked, and put these things on a menu. So it was like, oh, look, a banana. Like I already knew. But once I went out, I was disc golfing, so I didn't have money to do anything else. I saw Chicken of the Woods. The day before I'd put a Chicken of the Woods on the menu, I bought myself every single book that I could on mushrooms. And eventually you go out and you don't find mushrooms sometimes. So then I started studying plants and really, the what really changed my learning was working with Sam Thayer. So like say I'm nothing compared to, I'm just like an acolyte bringing his message. Honestly, Sam's guidebook is the greatest foraging book that's ever been written. It's like his life's work. It has like 300 more plants than any Peterson field guide that's ever been published, and he photographed and ate every single plant. Yeah, like it's crazy. That's why I didn't write a foraging guidebook. Sam Thayer. Yeah, he lives in Wisconsin. We have an incredible talent base here, and I'll be clear too. Like as far as cooking with foraged ingredients, I am an expert in this. As far as like botany and mycology, I am an amateur for sure, for sure. Sam is an expert, so I just have really smart friends. Anybody else?
Conquer, but even though you're not like certain about your ID or like or know where the thing is, have you ever just try it So it's like not goodbye.
Okay, that's a great question. So the question is, if I'm ever unsure of my ID, do I ever nibble a plant and try it anyway? Well, let's go back to if I can tell it, can I tell that this is a mustard green? Sure. I don't have to know exactly what it is. I know it's brassica something or mustard green, whatever genus of the brassica it is. There's no poisonous brassica. So if I know something like that, then totally fine. Like, oh, that mustard green is insanely bitter. Probably not going to eat that again. Or that one's like, I'm like, my eyes are watering because it's so spicy. I don't know exactly which one that was, but you'll be able to imprint them, and you may not know the Latin name, but you know it for all intents and purposes. So maybe sometimes, but typically no, and you don't. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite plant or a favorite mushroom you want to share?
Oh, it's impossible to answer. So okay, you guys want to be here for another 45 minutes? Okay, so favorite plant. So Timsula is up. Timsula is up there. That if I had to pick like one plant to be on a desert island, I could just eat Timsula all day long. I mean, for one of those braids, my friend Hank Shaw, if any of you are hunters, Hank Shaw lives in St. Paul too. He has a braid, and I covet it. You can't buy these in stores. They're multiple hundreds of dollars if you go to a reservation to buy a braid of Timsula, and it's something that most people are never going to even get to try for their entire life. Mushrooms, the mushroom probably the matsutake, but specifically the matsutake that grow here in the Midwest, because they do here. I don't know, maybe one of like 5 or 6 people that will pick them here in the Midwest. They are probably the rarest edible mushroom that I know of here. And they don't taste like anything else. They taste like red. They taste like if you put your face into pine soil and started chewing on the needles, and then there's someone who's like sprinkling cinnamon on your head while you did that. That's kind of like what it's like to eat a matsutake. I mean, they're incredible. And you can see like, and you got it's fun to find the shrumps. So I'm going to be in the really cool thing. So I'll give you a tip. We have been making matsutake habitat inadvertently. So matsutake, they grow naturally with jack pine and red pine here. And you're going to find them in like, the older forests with really, really mature trees. But we have all these red pine plantations. The matsutake are infecting all of these plantations. So their range, we are naturally expanding the range of our native matsutake just for the simple fact that we have all these red pine forests. It's like, hey, finally something decent that comes out of logging all these red pine plantations that we plant. So yeah, matsutake for sure. If I have to choose poultry fat, duck fat, goose fat, yeah, that's kind of like the holy grail. Clarified butter, animal. I am a really big proponent of animal fat, so I love animal fat. When I was at Heartland, where every animal was cooked in its own fat for the menu, we use duck fat on mushrooms most of the time if we had it. But I mean, whatever you have. If I have avocado oil at home, then we're using avocado oil. In the back. Oh, absolutely. Oh, I got a great radish top one for you. Actually, my book covers wild plants as well as garden plants because, like, one of the lessons, I was a chef, and I will always be. But I worked in kitchens for so long. I went into a garden, like this farm in Menominee, that had acres of gardens. I'd never seen a squash plant growing, and I saw the squash plant, and there was not any squash yet. And I was like, "What is this? This looks like I could eat it. What is this alien plant?" So I didn't harvest any squash. I cut all of the shoots, and then I brought them home. And I'm looking at these Dr. Seuss vegetables. It's one on the right, and guess what? Then I start digging a little deeper, and squash shoots, pumpkin shoots specifically, are very popular in Nepal, and you can harvest them. You're not going to cut all of them, but you can take a few, or just plant some extra squash leaves. I have something about squash leaves where you can eat those. You can use them as a wrap, so you just blanch them. They're a little prickly, so you blanch them. That calms that down, and you can make a giant dolma. Or I have something called the roulade vert, which is like the green roll, where I take a bunch of cooked plants and bind them with like a pinch of wild rice flour or something, and then I roll it up inside of a leaf, and then I brown that a little bit, and it's like eating a doma, like a little grape leaf roll, but much easier to make because the leaves are absolutely huge. But I had to get to the point. One of the lessons that the book taught me about what is one of the lessons that I put in the book is the lessons wild plants taught me about garden plants, about using the forager's instinct of looking at a plant in a different way. And how can I use all these different parts of different plants? Like, I want to know every single edible part of every plant. And I'm just curious, and I'm kind of like, I have this insatiable curiosity. Radish tops. One of the coolest things I saw someone do with radish tops is I had a cook from Mexico, and we had all these different greens, it's like lettuce and different things. So we took all these different greens, including the radish tops, because the tricky thing with those is that the stem is much more tough. So you can either like rip the greens off, or he would make this, what's it called? It's a green mole. And he would take all these greens and he basically cooks them with chicken stock and the garlic and a little cumin. And you would puree it up, and there's like sesame seeds and cashews and peanuts in the sauce. And you would cook this green nut mole sauce, and we would use it. We'd like smoke chicken or something, or we would put it over enchiladas. And that was one of the coolest things I've seen someone do with radish greens specifically. If you want to cook them, take the stems out, blanch them until they're tender and taste good to you, because they take longer to cook than most greens. Yes. Oh, so the whole plant is edible. So in Spain and Italy, they have a torta de borrago, and it's a pie made of borage leaves. So they're all prickly. After you cook them, they're very good. And related to that, thank you for reminding me, I'm going to plant a whole bunch of these this year. Virginia bluebells are in the same family. They're in the Boraginaceae, and they are actually better than borage. The Virginia bluebells are crazy delicious. They have it's like this oystery quality, this kind of oceanicness to them. And the flowers, I mean, they're so beautiful. I mean, get out of here. But you can cut the whole little plant and cook them like this little wee vegetable. They're so cool. But yeah, you can use borage you can use those plants interchangeably. But the borage flowers, they are kind of a novelty. They're pretty. I took this. I wanted it to be the cover of my book. But the leaves are really where it's at with borage. It's because they're a leafy green to be cooked. Bueller, going once, going twice. One more. That is a daylily. Yes, and on the note with daylilies, so daylilies are in foraging literature. I mean, as far back as I can remember, a lot of people talk about eating daylilies. They're a very common plant that is edible. They're a very common edible wild/cultivated plant, and I no longer serve them. The incidence of allergy to plants. This is a good example. This is one that I had forgotten. There are a few. I think daylilies probably have the highest proportion of allergy of a wild plant that I've come across, and a lot of my peers have stopped serving them just because it's like any part of it. You would never eat that raw, that pod. You'd always cook that. I don't have a problem eating them. If you eat them raw, they make you nauseous, but you never throw up. It's like a strange purgatory of gastrointestinal distress. It's like, when does it end? But they can be very good. They can be very good if you can tolerate them. You know, you can eat. I can eat all the cultivars, like no problem. Sunchokes are another one that you really want to be careful with. I poisoned myself last year with them. I went on a date, and I was writing about sunchokes, and I ate like the only thing I ate all day was sunchokes, and it was like a sunchoke soup, roasted sunchokes, pickled sunchokes, fried sunchokes, sautéed sunchokes. Yeah, like explosive diarrhea, like in the middle of my date for like 8 hours after that. It was the worst food poisoning I've ever had. Yeah. Yes, like great. Hi, nice to meet you. And it's like it was bad. It was bad. It was very bad. Very bad. And on that note,